A major plan by EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas to send urgent military aid of up to €40 billion to Ukraine failed to get off the ground at an EU summit in Brussels. The plan includes sending €5 billion on 2 million rounds of ammunition, as well as air defence systems, missiles, drones and fighter jets. But President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, said Ukraine will be funded for 2025 due to, among other things, the Commission's rearm plan adopted weeks prior.
We have a very good exchange with President Zelensky, and we reaffirm our full support to Ukraine. As you remember, we have our last two councils was dedicated on defense. The brainstorming day and last 6th of March, we have a discussion and we welcome and approve the package proposed by the European Commission to increase our defense spending. And now with these instruments, I believe that all the other member states or the different member states will increase their pledges to continue to support Ukraine.
Also on the agenda was Europe's need to boost competitiveness and innovation amid sluggish growth and the spectre of a trade war triggered by US President Donald Trump's tariff announcements. Earlier on, the EU said it was delaying until mid-April retaliatory tariffs against sector-specific targets in the US. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the decision was made to allow for more negotiations with the White House.
We are in principle opposed to tariffs. We think that tariffs are bad. They are like taxes. They are bad for consumers. They are bad for business on both sides of the Atlantic, without any question. We are in active discussion with the US administration on this issue, and I can confirm that we decided to adjust the timing of the entry into force of tariffs. The impact of our response does not change.
EU leaders also said they deplored the resumption of violence in Gaza, where over 500 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes, many of whom were children. They called for the ceasefire to be put back on track, for the hostages to be released without condition, and for humanitarian aid to be allowed back into the enclave. Shona Murray, Euronews, Brussels.
Former President of the European Commission, José Manuel Barroso, has said there will be no peace settlement in Ukraine without the European Union. Speaking with Euronews hours after the EU's 27 leaders wrapped up a summit in Brussels, Barroso countered fears that Thursday's summit showed divisions amongst EU member states on Ukraine's defense.
I don't agree there was no outcome. That's the usual way the European Union decides. Of course, it's by definition relatively slow because it's building a consensus among so many member states. But if you think about it, was in fact the conclusions are relatively rich. They reiterate important points, the fact that they cannot be original all the time, but they reiterate the commitment to European defense. That's very important. To support Ukraine, that's extremely important.
And just on the talks between the Kremlin and President Trump, I know you've met Mr. Putin 25 times, but the EU seems to be left out in the cold of these talks. How should the EU react to that?
Sooner or later, the European Union will come, because there will be no peace without the European Union, quite clearly. Not only Ukraine is a country in the European Union, and in Europe, and Ukraine says that it needs, of course, the European Union to be associated. But even Mr. Putin said already that there will be no peace without the lifting of sanctions, or the sanctions have been imposed by the European Union. So the Russians are the first to be interested in having Europe associated.
EU leaders at the summit in Brussels failed to reach an agreement on allocating €5 billion for the purchase of 2 million artillery shells for Ukraine this year. According to reports, several countries, including France and Italy, refused to commit to specific financial contributions, while Hungary vetoed the joint summit statement for the second time in as many weeks.
A single infected USB key and a virus that spreads, paralyzing a French warship's entire missile system. That's just one of the scenarios these cyber warfare officers are tackling at a naval base in Toulon, southern France. For 2 weeks, 15,000 soldiers across all branches of the French armed forces will be put to the test. The goal to strengthen cyber defenses using real-world scenarios, many inspired by Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Notre mission, dans un premier temps, c'était de réaliser des prélèvements techniques sur le système potentiellement compromis, infecté, pour ensuite, une fois les prélèvements effectués, effectuer une analyse pour savoir ce qui s'est passé sur le système. On s'entraîne pour dérouler les procédures, utiliser les outils, et pour que le jour où ça arrive, on soit performant et opérationnel.
But in the event of a real crisis at sea, the French Navy must learn to react quickly.
En cas de remontée d'une attaque cyber comme c'est simulé dans cet exercice, on va pouvoir vraiment mettre en place les mêmes chaînes fonctionnelles qui sont toutes déroulées dans cet exercice en intégralité, mais cette fois-ci avec une vraie pression opérationnelle qui fait que les gens vont devoir réagir le plus vite possible pour compresser les temps et récupérer au plus vite la disponibilité du système d'armes en question pour qu'on puisse continuer la mission.
With the digital threats on the rise, the French army plans to boost its cyber warfare force, growing from 4,000 to 5,000 specialists by 2030.
The European Commission wants to create a single defence market, as outlined in its new white paper on arming the EU by 2030. Right now, the market is divided with 5 leading countries: France, Germany, Italy, Spain and Sweden, causing a situation that leads to uncoordinated manufacturing and supply chains.
We are producing very many very expensive products, but in the small numbers, and what we need is that the market is able to provide necessary numbers of ammunition, missiles and different defense equipment, and that the countries can consolidate themselves together and buy together, and we need to give the opportunity for the small and medium-sized enterprises to operate on the market.
Since Russia invaded Ukraine, the EU has quadrupled its military production, but the Commission wants better coordination. It says key areas need strengthening, like air and missile defense, artillery, munitions, drones and military transport. To cut costs and improve efficiency, the Commission suggests buying equipment together.
Today, the Germans buy Germans, the Spanish buy Spanish, the French, of course, only French equipment. We need to open the tenders of the countries to other nations' companies as well. It needs to give the possibility to the small countries to be integrated part of that all.
The Commission also wants the EU to rely less on American military equipment. It suggests buying more from European producers to strengthen the local industry. But this will take long-term political commitment.
The question is, will the member states who clearly are spooked by the international geopolitical situation, will they now really put the money there in a sustained effort? And if there were to be a ceasefire in Ukraine, would they sit back and say, okay, panic over? Or would they really go ahead? Because I think that's the fundamental question. We need European defense, and it takes a decade of effort, a decade of spending to get there.
To fund this effort, the Commission reaffirmed its rearmament plan, which should enable 800 billion euros to be spent.
What Russian president wants is not only the actual annexation of territories, but loyal regimes and full Russification of countries and nations, says Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. She told Euronews that although the protest movement in her country had to go mostly underground, it only means people are getting ready to uprise in the right moment.
You know, for sure, what we see in Belarus, it's a creeping occupation, and it is done with allowance of Lukashenko, who is Putin's puppet. Lukashenko is ready to sell our sovereignty, sell our independence, our country to Russia just to stay in power. And it hasn't happened like recently. We see the process of Russification. You know what Putin is trying to do? It's not it's for Belarus, for example, it's not about physical annexation, it's about keeping a loyal government in power. This is what they want in Ukraine, actually, as well.
You said that it is hard to also foresee what can happen as long as Lukashenko is in Belarus. Do you think it's going to be the same if, hypothetically, Putin is no longer in power?
Of course, something can happen in Russia, and hence it will be a weaker Lukashenko, and people will uprise again. You know, it might be a victory of Ukraine. It also will weaken Putin and weaken Lukashenko. But the changes in Russia can start from changes in Belarus as well. There are more possibilities to change regime in Belarus than in Russia. You know, all these constant repressions that we are going through for almost 5 years already haven't made people to forget or to forgive or to deny their pro-European perspectives, pro-democratic. And so our movement inside the country, it of course now went mostly underground, but of course it hasn't disappeared. While Lukashenko is still detaining people every day. Every day 15, 20 people are detained because he knows that as only he stops, there will be massively people on the streets. He behaves as if still thousands of people standing in front of his palace. Visible quietness on the country doesn't mean that people gave up. It means that people are preparing and they will be ready when there will be possibility.